Hello, and welcome to the new podcast, Heplau's Ghost. We're excited to have you join. This is a podcast created by psych mental health nurse practitioners and for everyone. My name is Dan Wesemann, and I will be joined by host Sean Convoy, Kate Melino, Kendra Delany, and Melissa Chapman. Listen to us and hear our exciting news about psychotherapy and hopefully answer some of those questions you may have always had about it, or maybe want to know a little bit more about psychotherapy and how it enhance and improve your life. All right, strap in and get ready for an exciting episode. Here we go. Welcome to the very first episode of Heplau's Ghost. My name is Dan Wesemann. I have been a psych mental health nurse practitioner since 2008, which I'm feeling really old every time I say that. And obviously each year it goes by, it feels more and more older. So this is a podcast for anyone, I hope. It is not going to be, probably a lot of people will click off with this statement, but this is not going to be a true detective murder podcast, even though the Heplau's Ghost may sound a little bit in that regard. But we really want to talk about psychotherapy, something that each of us in here are very passionate about. We're going to focus on a different form of psychotherapy each episode and hopefully give you some insights into how it goes. We're, again, hoping this appeals to people who are both professionals who do psychotherapy, as well as anyone who maybe is interested in getting into psychotherapy or might have questions about that. I am joined by an esteemed colleagues from all across the United States. And, I think we all have a great perspective on what psychotherapy can do. And I think that's what we're going to do kind of on this first episode, is just kind of talk a little bit about what psychotherapy means, what it's, how it maybe has a personal impact in our lives, how we kind of see it, and what draws us to doing psychotherapy. So yeah, before I kind of get into my bit, I've been feeling like I've talked too much, but the clock keeps moving. So why don't we kind of have everybody kind of introduce themselves and where they're from, what part of the world, and maybe share a little bit about what sort of things they like about psychotherapy or what draws you to talk about this during this podcast. Who'd like to start? Feel like group therapy going on. Sean, you want to go? Let's go.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Sean Convoy. I am currently on faculty at Duke University, where I direct its psychiatric nurse practitioner program. Like Dan, I was trained years ago initially as actually a psychiatric clinical nurse specialist. And then later on, I became a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. So it's kind of interesting. I think for those of you who are familiar with the concept of a clinical nurse specialist, in most states at that time, clinical nurse specialists did not have independent prescriptive authority, which meant the only tool that you really actually had as a clinical nurse specialist was psychotherapy. So for me, that was my first tool and my most formidable tool in my toolbox as an advanced practice nurse. So for me, I think in some regards, psychotherapy comes much easier because it was the first thing that I was trained to do in this profession.
Yeah, that's interesting. From the University of Iowa, it's just kind of, so in Iowa, where we practice, actually CNSs or psych CNSs, we're still able to prescribe. I mean, that's somewhat recent, but you had to take like a psychopharm course and things like that. But yeah, that is kind of the origin here in nursing for sure, where kind of psychotherapy fits in and such. So yeah, who else would like to introduce themselves?
So I'm Kendra Delany. I live in the Nashville, Tennessee area. I've been a psychiatric nurse practitioner since 2017. So relatively a little bit newer to the game, but I actually always knew that I wanted to go into mental health. I was perhaps a weirdo that wrote my college admissions essay on why I wanted to be a mental health provider. As I think many of us in this profession do, I came to this profession with a lot of personal, family, loved ones who struggled with their own mental health experiences and lived my own as well. And so I just always knew that mental health was the route that I wanted to take. And which specifically within that, this really broad field, I wasn't quite sure. And I always knew that I saw a lot of healing happen both on the medication and therapy side. And to me, I was really passionate about being able to use all the tools that are available to help others move forward as well. And so when I learned about the nurse practitioner role, I was like, this is it. This is exactly what I want to do. And as I entered this profession and graduated, was a little bit frustrated by the fact that a lot of workplaces don't always value psychotherapy as being as important of a tool for a psychiatric nurse practitioner specifically to be doing. And so that has really, since I've been really fortunate that psychotherapy is a really critical part of my clinical practice. And I'm really passionate about being able to expand that for others as well, because this is a really cool and important part of our skill set. And I think that being able to increase access to care includes training and educating professionals and the public as much as possible about psychotherapy and all the different ways that can look.
Thanks, Kendra. That's awesome. Very cool.
I'm Kate Melino. I teach at the University of California, San Francisco School of Nursing in their psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner program. I have been a psych NP since 2014, and I was a psychiatric nurse for several years before that. And before I went into nursing, I was for a long time working in the local public health department as a sort of peer worker, harm reduction worker. So psychotherapy is always something I wanted to do. I initially came to my master's program enrolled in the psychiatric clinical nurse specialist track, which by the time I got to school, that was no longer being offered because the certification was being phased out for new people. But it was always really clear to me that, this sort of relational aspect of what we do just underpins absolutely everything else. And that, other things that you learn about like medication management and so on won't go anywhere unless you take the time to really build that foundational relationship and really address people's lives and learn about their stories and help them make sense of their stories. And so that's what I bring to this.
Thanks, Kate. That's awesome.
And I'll round us out. I'm Melissa Chapman, and I am the data evaluation person who has a personal interest in mental health for sure. I did think in junior high and high school that I wanted to go into the mental health profession, even did a mentored experience with a psychologist, thought that through grad school until I decided the best place for me was to contribute via data. And to the relational point that Kate had just said, I try to bring that to my data practice as well. Behind every data point is a person, and just humanize the work that I do. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. And we were saying this before, I think as you all heard from our voices too, we're all kind of coming from, psych mental health nurses. And, so Melissa, definitely, we were very valued her opinion and her perspective here, because obviously the data analytics, I think, and it's something we can definitely get into talking more about, and part of one of the things I think of with, why psychotherapy isn't more routinely accepted in the, healthcare system is probably, the lack of data that's out there. And I think that's why us, kind of hopefully doing this podcast, and as well as other work that we're kind of meeting with, hopefully adds to that literature and data perspective as well. So again, and I was going to say too, Melissa also has the perspective that make sure that we don't talk too much jargon and acronyms and things like that. So you may hear Melissa kind of jumping in going, wow, what the heck are you talking about? So, and hopefully that's good perspective to those who are listening and may not be PMHNPs and so on. So I kind of introduced myself. My name is Dan Wesemann. I'm from the University of Iowa, and I do have I'm program director for the PMHNP program. I've been a PMHNP since 2008. And before that, I was actually a social worker. So I got my MSW and practiced in that for about five and a half years. Ran a partial hospital program, did individual, group, family psychotherapy, and felt that I wanted to kind of provide more rounded, holistic type of care. And so that's what met. And it was kind of one of those weird situations. One of my early mentors, she was a PMHNP and actually an old PMH CNS. And she kind of, I'll never forget the time we had a little, coffee, a little lunch at a Village Inn. Does everybody know what a Village Inn is? It's a little Midwestern thing. It's like kind of like a Denny's, so it's like, one of those kind of diner places. And we just kind of chatted, and I was a social worker. And actually at the time I was like, yeah, probably I want to go into medicine. I want to go to medical school, and was driving late hours and taking my organic chemistry classes late at night and things like that, and studying for the MCAT and doing all that kind of wild stuff. But then she sat me down and was like, have you ever thought about being a nurse practitioner? And I was like, no, I haven't. Didn't know anything about it. As a male nurse, that's kind of a, way out there type of thing. So I didn't really even consider it. But then when she said it and kind of looked into it and talked to some more people, I really kind of found a home. I would say, I didn't start off in nursing, but I definitely, when I found nursing, it's been my home, and I've been proud to call myself a nurse. And I really have really found a home here. So, but what I think, about psychotherapy, and what draws me to continue to utilize psychotherapy in my practice, as well as, really, find a passion for teaching it and trying to, have others do this. I would say when I went back to teach at Iowa, what I really wanted to do is just kind of, make mini me's, or, just kind of duplicate myself. Cause and there's so many, I kept seeing patients, so often, it's just more and more patients, double booking people, which I shouldn't do, I know, but, there's just so much need and so many people to be needed. It's like, well, if I can't see all these people, maybe I can make more people or get more people out in the practice. And so that's what I've been drawn to. But psychotherapy, the one word that always comes to mind when I was thinking about this is it's magic. It's how do I talk to somebody, and as we know, this causes neurochemical changes in that other person. We've all had that experience, right? We've talked with a close friend, family member, we've been touched by people that we don't even physically touch. I mean, especially now with Zoom and podcasts and everything like that, we hear words, they affect us, they change us. And to use that in a therapeutic way, and to learn how to use it in a therapeutic way, has just been something that keeps me going, and something that I'm really inspired by. So I will admit I've never been in psychotherapy. I don't know if anyone on the podcast wants to admit to that, but I know a lot of times too, people say that, you need to be in psychotherapy to do psychotherapy. I guess I'm in the minority that hasn't done that yet. Maybe that's my retirement plan. I'll
Well,
get
Dan,
into some.
let me
Yeah,
step
Sean.
in quick and just share with you. Yes, I have been in psychotherapy, and what I typically tell my students is that I think you're the biggest cynic in the world if you don't think you could benefit from that which you provide. And from my perspective, I actually I encourage my students, if they have the ability and the means to do so, to get psychotherapy. And I actually allow some of those hours to count towards indirect hour counts for their practicum experiences. It's to give them the opportunity and the context to understand what it's like in the other chair.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. Yeah, it's probably one of my things I need to get in. And probably people know, psychoanalysts, they had to get in the chair or the couch or whatever you want to call it back in the day and things. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's a block. I need to kind of find some time to kind of do that sort of work. But I just enjoy the other side of the couch so much, I guess. And too, it's maybe I have a control issue. I don't know.
We can maybe spend a later episode,
There we go. Yes, dance therapy.
psyche.
Then you can see episode 6. Yeah.
It's so interesting. Like, I have been in therapy in and out for many years in different seasons of my life. And I think I'm always struck every time I'm like, okay, I'm done going to therapy now. Like, I've solved all the problems. I've fixed myself. Like, it's amazing how life just shows up in different ways in different spaces. And some of these themes that I've done so much processing around shows up again, as life invites it to. But one thing that I just love, I've really loved about therapy, it's like, I love, it's been so healing for me, but I also realize, how much better of a clinician I am for it as well. And it goes like both ways. Like, being a clinician then makes me be able to be more open and show up in therapy differently. And I don't know if there's a better or right way to, but my clients bring out stuff in me that like encourages me to look at shadows and corners of my life that I perhaps didn't have the courage or vulnerability or openness or even awareness to look at before. So, I could talk endlessly about why I love being a clinician and being a therapist, but I also love being in therapy even when I hate being in therapy.
I love what you just said there, Kendra. When we were talking, it got me thinking about, in some regards, when I socialize to students about the inherent value of psychotherapy, let's be honest, a significant subset of the population of students that we encounter have some sort of personal or familial relationship with mental health that probably informs the reason why they're in the program. So some of these students coming here are really, really riddled by some fear and stigma associated with the impacts of that, questioning whether they're capable of doing it. I like to reframe it. I say, listen, provided that you've done your necessary work to get yourself squared away, I would say that your experience with mental illness and your experience with mental health care can it actually translate to a superpower in clinical practice, because you will have acquired a context to care that not every other provider would necessarily have.
I love that, Sean. And I think I was having some random thoughts the other day, and I was thinking about how, working in mental health is is really working in pain management, is working in human pain management.
I love that.
And, maybe this sounds a bit abstract, but I don't think that you can work with human pain and not have it change you also. And I think I've also, been in therapy on and off and, here and there over the years. I think that's been so helpful for me in learning how to have that change me in a way that feels good and positive, rather than contractive, because we know that is a risk, an occupational risk that we all take too.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm thinking of, and let me know, again, this is not Dan's session, but, I tell patients this a lot of times too. I think, we need more than one therapist in our lives. I think, having a designated person that we say is our therapist, and we, pull out our insurance card and we pay copays for, I think that has value, of course, but I think there needs to be other people in our lives. And I guess that's maybe how I rationalize it a little bit too. It's, I've definitely had people who have pushed me, intellectually, emotionally, to really kind of look inward and really kind of examine my own life and my decisions, and help me through difficult problems in my life as well. And so the fact is, like I said, I haven't pulled out the insurance card and actually paid that person a copay. Sometimes it's, buying a pizza and 6 golden throat charmers, which is the term for beer that I remember and dearly beloved philosophy professor told me that was his term for using beer, golden throat charmers. So, but yeah, I think, it's an interesting perspective. Would love to kind of hear where else others on the, here kind of find people that do challenge them or, mentor them or kind of, encourage them emotionally.
Well, I think you bring up such an interesting point and question that I'm asked all the time is like, why do I need to go to therapy if I have like really good friends or I have a good community? And I think for those who are feeling more isolated or feeling more loneliness, the utility of having a professional sometimes can be a little bit more clear to those folks because they don't know where else they might be looking. But for individuals who have like really strong networks, like, well, I talked to my best friend about this. I talked to my, my parents about it, or my partner about it. What would be different? And the thing I always say is like, yeah, those experiences are invaluable and those people are invaluable. In community, we know, like the data shows us, our experience as humans shows us is so healing and so powerful and so important. And the boundaries are so different because, in therapy, you're not going to be getting like, there's a common misconception that's like advice giving, or it's going to be like coaching of what you should do or how you should move through the world. And that's not, what most people most therapists would conceptualize as being like, how it works. It's about helping you to look inward and open space and discover those answers and learn about yourself so that you know how you want to move through the world, how you want to engage, how to make choices and change. And so I think that that's a really, really huge part of it is that big boundary difference. And that doesn't mean that like it's all cold and icy and your therapist can't be human too, because I think that's the other end of the extreme is like, there's, I think, a subset of, and there's therapists who would argue that this is what's important, but they're just very, very boundaried to the point that it might feel more robotic to some. Again, not saying that's right or wrong, but that's a different stylistic approach. And it also doesn't have to be that. Like there's people for whom that type of therapist is a great fit. But like when I show up in therapy with, people like I was on a telehealth appointment earlier with one of my clients. We were doing therapy and I'm working from home because that's the world we live in now. And my baby started crying. And she knows the name of my daughter. She's like, hey, do you need to go get Caroline? Like, it's okay. And that doesn't mean, she's had a whole tour of my home and knows every detail of my child, but like she knows that I'm a human. And like some days how I'm going to show up differently as her therapist in therapy because I'm a human being who has my lived experience too. And so I think that that's a really important differentiation between like a friend and a therapist. Is that it's both can be vitally important to healing, but they do serve different roles in different spaces.
It's interesting. I see some similarities in my view of this, and then some dissimilarities. I think, the inherent challenge is, if I go to a peer or a colleague or a mentor, I'm going to get some things that are probably more around psychotherapy. But if I go to a family member, there's 2 things that I think about that is one, I'm burdening that family member and I'm straining the nature of the relationship because they can't be my wife, my parent, my sibling. They have to be that. So from my perspective, I think I've been trained, not too big surprise with the military experience, rather rigidly to think about making sure that you kind of separate the streams. But, when Dan brought up the idea of having mentors kind of function in this role, well, that actually resonates with me. And in that regard, I don't have a mentor. I pretty much have a board of advisors. I've got a whole bunch of people in my life that I can go to in certain situations or circumstances, knowing that they're going to call me out on my stuff when I feel like I need it.
Nothing more valuable, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Those kind of
And
people.
some of those people are on this call right now.
Yeah.
So, good thing.
That's wonderful. Yeah, Kendra, you kind of mentioned too, sometimes we don't have to, be the best version of ourselves. I think I remember at a conference a while ago, somebody kind of describing the therapy that they did as kind of like an all you can eat. If you go to an all you can eat, sometimes it's great. And sometimes you're going to get a stomach bug. There's going to be some not so great experiences. So I like that idea and that expectation that we all are all human and things like that too. So I would love to know what Melissa's thinking right now. Penny, for your thought.
I'm thinking about my own experiences with psychotherapy and then my own experiences as a professional. I love the board of directors idea. Love it, have it. And it's such a rarefied position if you're lucky enough to have that, because it has to be people that call you on your stuff, which often might not, maybe it is. It may or may not be family, friends, spouse. But I also think maybe something Kendra said earlier, being able to go to shadow places or other vulnerabilities. I maybe don't want to invite that in my relationships for the reasons that Sean said either. I just don't want that. I'm not sure why, but I think that's the value that I have found in having a separate, doesn't know me, doesn't have their own agenda except to help me reflect on going into those areas and growing. And you all are talking very plain language, so thank you. Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about in preparation for today is that how I imagine each and every one of us were trained under a different theoretical model. And how, in some regards, I think the diversity of different theoretical models that inform our psychotherapy actually is a strength for advanced practice psychiatric nursing. But it's always interesting to talk with people about, what kind of psychotherapy do you practice? And I don't know about you, but the longer I do this, I'm not a purist. And quite frankly, I think in many regards, it starts to evolve or devolve into an amalgamation of different theoretical frameworks that surface given certain situations and circumstances that dynamically happen with the patient. So what are your experiences like in terms of this idea of what kind of a psychotherapist do you conceptualize yourself as?
Yeah, that's I would say that's kind of a heady question, but I agree. It's something I struggle with myself is, and I agree. I think it's just more over time that I've, initially, and if somebody asked me today, I would kind of give them a rote answer of saying that I'm mostly CBT, and I do like existential therapy as well. And so but it's some combination of that too. I definitely dabble into some mindfulness and DBT concepts and things like that I've had experience, kind of providing for people in various areas. And I think that is the kind of, technical skill of, experience and just kind of getting to know people and knowing kind of patterns. I had a faculty member say that, once you get into practice, it's like a file cabinet and you put people in that file cabinet, and over time that file cabinet gets really full. And so that allows us to kind of think about, I've heard something like this, and this is how people get past this problem, or this is how this person got past that problem. And so those kind of things. And again, weaving it through a theoretical framework, offers some, evidence base and some, validity to it, but it's all about, that real connection, that personal and sharing kind of what we've seen actually be successful. Because a lot of times when we meet people in therapy, they feel like, and they're drifting out in the ocean and they need something just to kind of, stabilize them to some degree. So, yeah.
Yeah.
We're getting close, but yeah. What are
I was going to say, Sean, I'm similar to you. I'm in that I'm definitely kind of a mix of a lot of different things. I always like to describe my therapy style as evidence-based woo-woo is probably, I draw largely from internal family systems like IFS therapy and somatic things like somatic experiencing. I also am trained in brain spotting. And for context, I largely work with complex childhood trauma and dissociative disorders. So the modalities that I use are heavily like trauma-based modalities that are really looking at those, like the somatic ways that trauma shows up in our body and in our lived experience. But the things that I do, definitely, they sound weird if I just explain, like for those who aren't familiar with IFS, the idea is that we have all these little parts and we have a core self, but the parts can take over. And that's a whole discussion in and of itself. But when you start describing to people, hey, you got a lot of different parts and one of them showing up this way, they're like, well, I'm not 12 or 100 different people. Like, what are you talking about? And so definitely a little bit of woo woo, but, I'm really passionate about it. And I love seeing I love the creativity that comes with it and the ways that these modalities allow people to really get creative and imaginative in the ways that they show up in the world and explaining their lived experience in a way that makes sense.
I love the woo woo. Yeah, it's magic, right? I mean, it's just woo woo magic, whatever. But there is a method to the madness for sure.
So in school, yes, absolutely. I think cognitive behavioral therapy was a focus for sure. I love a good behavioral chain analysis, which maybe we'll get into in a couple episodes. But this conversation is making me think of the first time I felt like I really saw a transformative, encounter with psychotherapy. When I was in my undergraduate nursing program, I had the opportunity to do a pretty long clinical rotation at a clinic in Toronto, Canada. That's where I'm from. And it was the only program in Canada at that time where they offered services for concurrent treatment of eating disorders and substance use. And so they offered a lot of DBT style and classic DBT model services. And they did not let trainees be in the DBT group for various reasons. But they did allow you they had one of those two-way mirrors. And so they did allow you to observe the group through the mirror. And I remember being, a second year nursing student or whatever, and watching this group of people come in. And I knew a little bit about what some of them had been dealing with. And it was very, profound, challenging, disturbing stuff. And I remember thinking, just feeling the palpable anger in the room of these clients and feeling scared. Like, I'm scared of these clients. They're so angry. And watching the facilitator lead the group and how skillful she was. And as the sort of hour and a half went on, just the energy in the room really, really settled. And it was absolutely palpable. And I just remember thinking, wow, I'm not really sure what I've just witnessed, but it's magic, like you said, Dan. And I want to know the magician info.
Yeah. I want to see behind the hands. Yeah. I want to get the magic secrets. Yeah, exactly. That's awesome.
Yeah. I think about my experience as a CNS. I think the first form of therapy I was formally exposed to was milieu therapy, right? So in that regard, I think that has tremendously influenced everything that I do. I to this day, I can remember the operational definition of milieu therapy, which is the therapeutic use of self and environment to advance patient goals, right? And thinking about how you structure the environment around safety, structure, support, and social skills. In my mind, every time I think about a therapeutic relationship with a patient or a group, or quite frankly, sometimes even in the clinical environment with students, I think about structuring things that way. And that takes my mind to the next thing that I learned, which is really more about Carl Rogers and Rogerian psychotherapy and this idea of unconditional positive regard. So in many regards, those foundational elements of psychotherapy are like this river that's kind of underneath everything that I do today. I've been formally trained in cognitive therapy, cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure, and adaptive disclosure. They're all different frameworks of different trauma-focused therapies, but underneath it, it's the secret sauce. And the secret sauce, from my perspective, is really being able to kind of manage the milieu and leverage unconditional positive regard, like Carl Rogers talks about. So for me, I think in many regards, the newer, the more recent things that I've learned are the veneer on the outside, but what's underneath is the more substantive stuff, which is, quite frankly, going back to Peplau, sorry to name drop there, it's about the therapeutic use of self, right?
Well, that sounds like a great way to wrap up. So yeah, thank you for listening to Peplau's Ghost, our very first podcast that we have here. And so, yeah, we need to think about a way and how we're going to end these podcasts. And I know different ways have kind of done this, but I like the idea of maybe wrapping up with things I'm thinking about and secret sauce, woo-woo type of therapy, and just the magicians that I think we all profess to be in practicing and getting our own forms of psychotherapy. So All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And look forward to our next episode coming out soon. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the entire podcast. Appreciate your support here, and feel free to click subscribe and like and connect with any of the hosts through their multiple social medias connected through the podcast. Look forward to listening to another podcast, and we will get that out as quick as we can. Thanks so much, and take care.